What is going on, everybody? Welcome to GLE. I got a rock star guest for you today. This individual has spent some time on Cirque du Soleil and has since been really focused on impacting leaders and really impacting the service industry from a leadership perspective. And she's doing some really cool things. We got connected online, and I'm thrilled to have her on the show today and really have a first conversation with her, get to know her a little bit, and also share her with my GLE network because she's doing some really cool things. Carolene Méli, welcome to GLE. How are you this morning?
Good. I'm so good. Thank you. And hey, some of the best conversations are the first conversations, right? So I'm excited.
I'm excited too. This will be fun. So we were just talking a little bit before the show about your background, but I really think you have an amazing story that I want to share with my audience. So talk a little bit about your background and how you've gotten to where you are today, now starting this leadership coaching adventure you're on.
Yeah, so I've always, I started off in the service industry. I grew up in Australia and I really naturally fell into leadership. I felt that I was always, I naturally had some of that skill set that a good leader has, even from an early age. So I kind of found my groove quite quickly in that respect. And quite early on in my career, so to speak, I ran away with the circus, as they say. I joined Cirque du Soleil, and I started. I was always in the front of house teams. I started in the hospitality side, and then where I really found where I really loved to be was really in the VIP experiences. So that was a 10-year span of my life, of my career. And I worked in 17 different countries, leading teams in all over the world. And I also, away from Cirque du Soleil, I also ran the entertainment department on a cruise ship. I'm a full-time traveler. I'm currently in Europe, in the Mediterranean, and all the way up till now, where I have a leadership program, like you mentioned, for up-and-coming leaders, the new leaders that are stepping into their first leadership roles, their first career at the beginning of their career path.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm jealous of you being over in the Mediterranean. My wife and I got to visit Santorini a few years back, and we're in Greece and Italy, and we stopped by Paris, and we still have some places we need to get over there, like Spain, Barcelona, that sort of thing. But man, it's a beautiful part of the world. I'm jealous.
It's very magical, the Mediterranean. I write a lot of poetry about the Mediterranean specifically because it has something that it's quite undescribable. It has this underlying magic that just pulls you in. I'm sure you were surrounded by the Mediterranean on your trip. I'm sure you can attest to that. But yeah, it's a pretty special place.
It definitely is. Definitely is. I think for me, with my Christian background and just knowing the Bible, just being able to walk and see places where they talk about in there, coming from the States and being in the States your whole life, it's very, a very different type of history behind everywhere you go over in Europe. But
it's the same with Australia. I grew up in Australia. I'm half French. My father's French, and I definitely associate more with my European heritage as opposed to the Australian side of me. But it was the same. The first time I went to Europe, I was 18 years old, and I grew up in Australia, where we don't have buildings and cathedrals from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. There's artifacts from thousands of years ago, and so, like you said, you went to Greece. You go in Athens and stand in front of the Acropolis and the Parthenon, and you start thinking about the Greek gods and mythology, and it's just this whole other world. Coming from Australia, quite a young country, as well. So I totally relate to that.
So half French and Australian is your mom?
Yeah, my mother's from New Zealand, actually. I was born in New Zealand. It's a huge, amalgamation of many different heritages and cultures in there. But I always tell everyone that my soul is from the Mediterranean. That's where I feel most connected. So,
very cool. Very cool. What did your parents do?
So my father was always in finance. So started as an accountant, was CFO of a number of big companies over in Australasia, Australia. And my mother, actually, she was always in the healthcare fields, but she went back to university in her 50s, and we actually graduated together. Me as a 20-something-year-old and graduating with my mum. It was actually really, really cool. So yeah, healthcare, and then in finance side.
Wow, very cool. Very cool. So you mentioned earlier, it stuck out to me because I resonate with it a little bit. You mentioned growing up and you felt like you kind of always had a leadership sort of skill set, or it was sort of a natural thing for you to step into leadership roles, and that resonates with me because that was kind of my history growing up through my younger days, and I'm just curious, like, what is that skill set you're talking about? Is there anything specifically that you picked up on early, the specific skills where you were like, maybe I am better suited in a leadership sort of role?
Well, I was the eldest of three girls, so I think that's where that kind of seed was planted. Uh, I was very, very bossy, apparently, and very, very impatient. So that's what my sisters tell me anyway. And so, that's kind of where it started. Obviously, those are not two qualities of a great leader. But I was always kind of, leading my sisters and organizing things. And I like to organize. I like to be the organizer of things, And then I also grew up a gymnast. I was a gymnast for pretty much my entire childhood, all the way through to high school. And I started coaching very early on when I was about 12, 13, just kind of a junior coach, just helping like with the little kids. And that's really where I started to see, I started to really understand the importance of how you communicate to someone so that they understand what you're saying. In gymnastics, for example, if you tell a 5-year-old to do a skill that has a name, they're not going to know what it is, right? And
Right.
also when you're 5, you don't really have as much body awareness as you do later on in life. So,
Definitely not.
right? So I learned really early on that I needed to use my words, and also in gymnastics actions like, pardon me, I could demonstrate, but how to communicate in a way that was going to make the other person understand. So that was kind of my first glimpse into leadership, and especially around communication. And I think that is really where I saw a little bit of that spark. And then I think the second element was same in that environment in coaching gymnastics. I love to see the reaction that I got. I loved when the kids would run over to me at the beginning of class, and I love to have that feeling of positive impact. And I think coaching gymnastics was really the first time I really felt that. And that feeling has, of course, stuck all the way through even to now. It's one of the best feelings, I think, as a leader, when you can feel how much you've impacted someone just through the work that you're doing with them and the connection that you have with them.
I love that. Absolutely love that. The communicating in a way the other person will understand. I come growing up from an environment, and I'm not talking negatively about my family in any way, but I was around a lot of people that they would get frustrated, right? If they're trying to explain something to someone else, it's like, it's your fault because you don't understand me. It wasn't a, hey, I need to figure out how I need to change the way I'm communicating to this person because they're not getting it. And that's not that person's fault that they're not getting it. It's my fault because I'm not communicating it effectively. And so that's a huge leadership shift in mindset that I think you nailed it. You're learning as a coach to do that to young children, and young children are a great example of that, right? Because they are so moldable. And I think it is, like, ever since starting to do the podcast and put leadership content out, when you hear and can see people being impacted in a positive way by your leadership, it's really a special thing. And you realize how you can impact so many people. And I'm curious, like, from your Cirque du Soleil days, what was the real turning point for you to say, I can do more, I can impact more, I can go do other things that I feel really called to do or passionate about? Was there like a turning point for you to kind of push you in this direction?
I think and to your point around communication, I mean, we're talking communication when we can speak the same language, right? Like you and I right now, but there's a whole element of communication where how can you communicate with someone who does not speak the same language as you? And I'll give you the perfect example. I'm living in Montenegro here. The language is Montenegrin, which is very similar to Serbian. It's a Baltic language. I don't speak it at all. I speak a couple of languages. Montenegrin or Serbian is not one of them. Now, because we're wearing masks every day, when we're going to the supermarket, let's say, I cannot even communicate like from here down. I cannot communicate with my mouth. Usually I'm very much used to being in environments where I don't speak the language. As a traveler, I'm always in that environment, but usually I'm able to smile. I'm able to kind of use my facial expressions. The minute you put a mask on, your whole bottom half of your face is gone, right? So sometimes I think, oh my gosh, I hope they can see I'm smiling, like with my eyes or something, because it's that whole element has been now just completely removed. So that is something that I did not expect. And I kind of laugh at it every now and then. I'm like, how can I tell you that I'm smiling? How can I show you I'm smiling without you seeing my mouth? It's a really interesting concept to think about. But yeah, language is really where I kind of found my leadership style change for the better. I was in places where my staff, even though the mandate was that they had to speak English, I'm pretty sure in the interview process, the question was, do you speak English? And then they just say yes. And then that's it. You're in,
Yeah.
There wasn't really a deep dive into language skills. So sometimes I really was not able to communicate with my staff. Now, Cirque du Soleil, like any kind of front of house, hospitality, events, entertainment environment, it's very fast paced, right? It's quick. You're dealing with lots of people. They're coming to watch a show, or they're at an event, something like that. And so I was in so many situations where I could not really communicate quickly with my team, but I had to find a way. And again, that's where the language comes into it. And even how can I remove all the big words and really dumb down my vocabulary so that we can communicate? And it's really interesting when that happens, because your ego really steps in and challenges you, right? Like, if I have to speak as if I was speaking to, let's say, a 5-year-old, and I'm not talking about this negatively at all, just in terms of the language skills, all of a sudden I think to myself, oh, I don't really sound smart as a leader. I don't really sound like an expert because of the way that I have to communicate. Whereas when you think about it, that's actually quite the skill set is, okay, how can I communicate this in the simplest way possible? Remove all the slang, remove all the big words, just so we can actually, that message really needs to get to that person just because of the style of the work. How can I do that in a way that is going to be effective? And so that's where, for me, communication is a huge part of leadership. And, I mentioned to you before we jumped on the interview that I was in Russia for 3 months. And I could not communicate with my staff at all because I spoke about 5 words of Russian and they didn't speak English for the most part. So I was leading a team through a translator.
Wow.
And it was honestly such a huge, when I think about it, it was really integral part of my leadership journey. But just imagine, I'll never forget this moment. I have a lot of energy, and I kind of like to joke around and like kind of break the ice like that. And I remember just standing in front of this group of like 15 people, and I told a joke. Can you imagine like telling the joke, kind of chuckling to yourself because you think it's funny, blank stares on their face because the translator is translating, and then there's this like crazy delayed reaction. It was the most awkward. I'll never forget that moment. But again, it's like, how now I have to really showcase my leadership style and lead these guys through almost like a third party, right? Through a translator. So yeah, I think that to answer your question, language is really where I found my stride and where I found my strength as a leader, in the way that I felt like I could lead really well, no matter what language we were speaking in or what the language barrier was. Now, obviously not straight away, but that's where I've grown to develop those skills.
My wife's a multilingual Spanish speaker from a Mexican family, and half her family is Spanish speaking. So, when we go visit her family in Mexico, I'm the gringo from up north.
Right.
And, I stand out 6'3", big white dude down in Mexico who doesn't speak a lick of Spanish at all. And so I resonate with you. And, I think it's funny how when you're talking about communicating with a mask on, I have trouble communicating in English with people wearing masks. And it's like, can I not hear? Like, I know I can hear well. And so I'm realizing how much just seeing their mouth, seeing that physical expression impacts the way we communicate. Because all you do is just do that, and I can't understand what you're saying.
Exactly, right.
It's wild.
Exactly. And even on the language thing, like I noticed this in the United States. When I first started touring, I came straight from Australia. So the level of slang that was in my vocabulary, I didn't even realize. And I remember one time I was kind of running out of the work area, and I said to my staff, guys, go take out the rubbish before you leave. And they were like, rubbish? What's rubbish? And I was like, trash. Okay, I'm never going to use that word again, because
Rubbish.
I personally, for me, it's not part of my vocabulary. I'm like, go take out the trash. And so it's really interesting, even in the same language, when you're dealing with people from all different countries, it's really interesting to pick up on the things that you say every day, but actually other people don't use it as part of their own vocabulary. So sometimes I think that's really funny. And as a leader, again, imagine if every time I communicated in that way, imagine in that moment if I'd got really frustrated and annoyed at them,
Yeah.
Instead,
Right.
it was a laughing matter. We kind of joked about it, but it's like you quickly have to go, oh, okay, that is not, I cannot communicate in that method. What's some other vocabulary that I can pull from really quickly? So yeah, it's something that I guess you don't think about if your environment doesn't change a lot, or if you're not used to people from many different places. But that has been my reality for the most of my career. So I love kind of diving in and talking about it from that point of view.
I absolutely love that. The importance of getting broad experience is something I've learned so late, later in my life, and that I, wish I would have had more opportunities. Like we traveled all around like the Midwestern United States, right?
Right.
And there's some variability state to state or whatever, right? But nothing like going to a different country where they're speaking a different language from a totally different culture. You know, when we went to London, my wife and I absolutely loved it over there because we could communicate to a certain degree, but it was like you said, going to Australia, they use a little bit different vocabulary. And so there's a little bit of learning there. But I loved your story about the joke and the delay in the joke. I'm actually a student of stand-up comedy, and
Oh, wow.
my
So
brother
you
and
must
I,
really relate to that.
what's that?
You must really relate to that, or you must have felt that, at least, that me standing there in front of that group.
Well, when I see good leaders get up and speak, or anyone who's a good speaker can get up in front of people and really just like make a room spin. Like I've heard comedians talk like, it's like you're doing a trick. It's like you're spinning a plate on a stick and you're just up
Right.
there doing your trick. And like, nobody knows what you're doing. Like very few people can actually see what's happening during a stand-up comedy routine. And, it really is, I think, the truest form of public speaking, if you can actually get up on a stage and do stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
But I'm just fascinated by it. And so, that was a perfect example of how timing and just the smallest little things in a joke
Right.
make it work, right? And how something like a translator can just, totally throw that off, right?
Well, I think also really how you feed off what you can see straight away, right?
Yeah,
Like I was waiting for their reaction to almost validate my joke. In this case, it was a joke, but we could be talking about anything, like just leading a team in general. If you're giving them instruction, if you are not able to immediately see the impact of what you've just said, it's very hard to determine, is that the right, did I say that correctly? Maybe even the case, did I offend someone?
right,
Do they understand? Because especially when you're dealing with languages, if you say, do you understand? The answer is always like, yeah, 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 even though they have no idea what you've just said.
right.
And so it's when you have that delayed response of reaction, I think it completely throws everything off, and there's a few minutes of panic. So it really showcases that importance of our visual cues in when we're standing in front of a group and leading and instructing and advising, and no matter what, or even storytelling, I would say. It's like how much you feed off that immediate validation from what the crowd is saying, or if you can feel that things are not going well, like they're not
Right.
responding, they're shutting down, naturally you tweak, right? And you go, and you adapt and you change something in your delivery or the messaging.
Yeah, you're so right. That is such an amazing message you just shared, to be able to adjust. And that's what comedians do, right? They go out on stage 100 times, 200 times with the same joke, and they mold it and they craft it and they simplify it and they tweak it. And you touched that earlier, simplifying your message to a point where people can understand the premise. And I think leaders often fail because they don't set up the premise, the why, why are we doing what we're doing? What's the motive behind it? How can I help people want to do what I'm asking them to do? And we're kind of touching and getting into sort of that experience side of things, and leadership creating an experience for people, because I think that's ultimately what you're all about. So I'm curious, like, share a little bit with our audience how your experience in creating experiences for people in Cirque du Soleil and in the service industry, how does that translate to leadership skills from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, Cirque du Soleil, they're arguably some of the best experience creators in the world, right? Whenever you go to to a Cirque du Soleil show, you're going to be astounded, or there's going to be something that happens in that show that is going to take your breath away for the most part. And so I feel like that has shaped me a lot. And sometimes when I would feel, a little bit complacent, or a little bit like, ugh, or kind of fed up with my work and what I was doing, the strategy that I used is I would go sneak into the big top, just stand at the back, in the pitch black. And I wouldn't watch the show, because I've seen the shows that I worked on 100 times, let's say. So I've seen that, I would actually watch the audience, and I would watch the kids that were like, like laughing, or the big eyes. I would watch people literally go like this as they saw something death defying. I would watch people laugh, and it was the most incredible moment. And then I would kind of jump back out of the big top, and then there'd almost be like a new spring in my step, because I'm not watching the entertainment. I'm watching the impact that the entertainment has on, in this case, the audience. And when I think of it, from a leadership point of view, that was huge in thinking, I need to focus firstly on how I want my teams to feel, whether that's on a daily basis, whether that's in their career path with me, if they stay with me for a month, if they stay with me for 3 years. How do I want them to feel when they're with me? How do I want them to feel my leadership skills is actually adding to their lives, and helping them develop? And so when I speak a lot about experiences with people, and especially people that have physical experiences and they want to improve them, that's the very first question I ask. How do you want them to feel, the other person to feel, once they've gone through that experience? And I think we don't often consider that. I feel like we take it for granted, right? Oh, we want them to have a positive experience. Yeah, we want them to know all the things so they can do their job, for example. But do we really take a minute to go, okay, here's my team in front of me. How do I want them to feel, even at the end of this day? Like, if you really simplify it. And so I think that is the very first question that as a leader we should be asking ourselves. And it could be, you're the leader of your family, you're the leader of your community group, no matter how you associate yourself with leadership. I think it's the very first question that I think is so important, and we never really consider it to any great lengths, and I think it's a shame.
I think you're right. Have you heard of Chris Voss?
Yes, I just finished his book.
Oh,
Yeah.
did you? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
splitting the difference, it's called, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I love Chris's stuff, and that's a fantastic book. He talks about just being playful with people, like when you go to the supermarket, or when you go to the store or Target, or wherever you're going, just being playful with people, and like and being fun, and if you can, like you said, leave their, what's their experience going to be like talking to you, and so many people are just kind of in their own world, right? They're worried about what they have going on, and that's where, when we get into creating experiences, and really serving other people, I think leadership becomes truly a service, right? It's an outward focused mindset, and for people who are internally focused all the time, it's hard to get that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. But I also think sometimes we overcomplicate it. I feel like sometimes we think about experiences and we think we need a big budget, or we need a big following or community, or we need all these resources. And, I have an interview series on YouTube called The Experience Creators. And I interview experience creators from all over the world, from all different fields. I just interviewed a magician, then I interviewed a videographer, personal branding expert, entrepreneur. And really the conversation is around the premise of the question, what elements make an incredible experience. And what's really, really interesting is they all have completely diverse answers because of their expertises, their background, their realities. However, there is always commonalities throughout the answers, which I find really fascinating. I can't wait to ask the question because I'm like, oh, it's coming. Like, I know I'm going to find these like nuggets.
Yeah.
And the four main commonalities are personalization. How can you make your experience personalized so they feel special, right? The second is either a sense of belonging or connection. That's pretty self-explanatory, right? We all want to feel connected to other people in some way. The third is memorability. How can we make this as memorable as possible so that in 10 years' time, they're still talking about this experience? And then the fourth is shareability, especially now in the world where we want to experience something and we also want to share it. And so I find that really interesting I think we overcomplicate it. And if we bring it back to those four elements and we think, even if it's just like you mentioned, going to the supermarket, okay, look at those four elements. How can we achieve at least a couple of those in that moment? And it can be quite simple, but I think sometimes we throw all these big terminology around, and then we think we have to go to all these seminars and trainings and all this kind of thing. But it all comes down to that. How can we connect with someone, like you said, so we feel connected to them, we feel special through how they've personalized it. It may just be acknowledging their name if it's in a group, or acknowledging maybe something that's happened to them recently, or a goal that they're working on, And so, yeah, I think those are the four key elements. And I think if we just simplify it a little bit, just take all the how should I say, like the glitter around it, just remove all that and bring it back to those four key elements of what makes an incredible experience. I think it is actually quite easy to achieve, especially on a day-to-day basis.
Very cool. Very cool. I never thought of it that in that light of it being just easy to do, fairly simple, maybe not easy, but simple, I would say, it's a simple thing. I'm finding that, nothing's really easy out there, but there's a lot of things that are more simple than others. I'm an engineer by training. And so I've had to constantly fight my vocabulary and, making things crisp and simple is not easy for most engineers or technical sort of people. They like to, they were basically trained to get up and talk about how smart they are and prove how smart they are by their dissertation.
Logical mindset, right?
Very logical, right? This is the only way to do things, and your way is not my way, so it's wrong.
Right. Yeah. Creativity is not necessarily
right. Yeah.
part of the conversation.
But I love that. So personalization, belonging or connection, memorability, and shareability. And if she mentioned her YouTube channel, The Experience Creators, make sure you go subscribe to her YouTube channel. I watched a few of those videos before our episode, and really great content there. So make sure you go check that out. Let's talk a little bit about Better Your Leadership and that program. I was looking into that too, and I saw something that stuck out to me. It was a specific little section for the younger, maybe younger, more inexperienced leaders who maybe have some self-doubt or insecurities, like who am I to be a leader? Because I dealt with this a lot as a young man, and still do, and I think everybody to some degree still does. But talk a little bit about that and what you have to share with those young leaders who are aspiring and maybe dealing with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm so passionate about leadership specifically as it pertains to young people, because I think sometimes we don't give enough credit to the leadership journey when it first starts out, where we have these young guys starting in new roles. Maybe they're, 19, 20, they've had one or two jobs and now they're stepping into a leadership role. When you're that age and when you're at that stage of the leadership journey, for the most part, your leadership style grows really based on your environment, right? So if you have great leaders around you, amazing. But there are also the case where you don't have great leaders around you. You have experienced leaders, or you have leaders who are just toxic, or they just don't know how to handle difficult situations. And that comes through in how they communicate, how they make you feel. And so I know for myself as a young leader, when I was that age, and even all the way up even all the way up to recently, I was always begging like to have some kind of leadership training, development training. I was always kind of eager to do all those things. And it never really came. For the most part, I would say for 85% of the roles that I had, I never had access to that kind of extra learning. I had to do it all myself, which of course now has been a positive because I'm able to step into this kind of role. But I really wanted to create, in a nutshell, the program that I wish I would have had when I was first starting out. And so I'm very connected to the content. I'm very connected to the messaging and the impact that I want to have. And the curriculum really focuses on 3 main sections: leading yourself, so that's self-leadership, right? Leading your team, which you could classify as employee experience, and then leading your guests. So this is for the service industry. So when you have customers, when you have passengers, even when you have guests, and that could be classified as customer experience. But there's the focus really is on leading yourself. And just think of when you were 20 years old, like how much did we do around self-leadership? I think it's something that we come into so much later, right? In our adulthood, in our career. And it's such a shame that it's not really focused on earlier on. And that's where I see myself. That's the role that I want to play. And so that's what this program is all about. So it's for those young up and coming leaders who want to take that extra step and learn about leadership really straight away so that they can apply it really, really quickly. And I think if more programs kind of existed like this, where we were talking about self-leadership, we were talking about understanding our own triggers, how we react, understanding our own mindset, like growth mindset versus fixed mindset, understanding these elements about leadership and self-leadership, man, imagine the leaders that we would create around us, right? So that's what it's all about.
Totally. And we're not taught that in school, right? It's kind of like
Right.
business or anything else. Like no one's teaching people this stuff.
Yeah.
But it is out there if you want to go look. So, I think it is, I think back to my 20s, and I wasn't focused on this stuff and growing myself and leading myself, right? And there's an element with everyone I've spoken to on this show, and so many successful people. They always talk about consistency and consistently doing things that might not feel like doing in the moment, but they're the little things that are going to get you where you want to go. And I think everyone I've spoken with has a common trend of consistently leading themselves and growing themselves, and they're doing things daily to consistently lead themselves to have the right mindset, so they're prepared when they go to their uh, leadership role, and they're prepared to have those tough conversations. They're in the right mindset, and they know themselves enough to walk away when they're maybe not in the right mindset, right? And not have those conversations then.
Yes, exactly. Self-awareness, I think, such an underrated skill. And I think if you are really dialed into yourself and how you react, like pulling up those moments where you're like, you know what, I just need to take a step away. I think you're at a whole different level already just by really truly understanding yourself. But you have to be able to ask yourself very intelligent questions, but also able to take time and figure out what the answers are,
Totally. My dog's losing his mind over here in the background. So if you hear the dog barking, that's Moose, my camera
It's his
dog. Sometimes he gets
conversation. It's
distracted.
his conversation. He's here all in.
He likes to be on the show occasionally. But yeah, I absolutely love that. Absolutely love that. And I'm curious, you mentioned how you liked VIP experiences. And I always think there's certain types of people who look at the VIP sort of people in a negative light, like they think they're better than other people, or that I think what for many people with sort of a fixed mindset and not a growth type of mindset, when they see people that aspire to more and want success and want nice things, they instantly interpret that as like arrogance or they're selfish or something like that. And I'm just curious your perspective on that VIP mindset, because I absolutely think creating VIP experiences, and I know from my experience being in them, they feel great. Like it's a wonderful feeling, and being around that is the environment that I personally want to be in. I want to create that for my family and my teams. So how do you create that, and what makes that so important for you?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. There are, of course, the arrogant, selfish people I dealt with that on a daily basis in my head, listening to them talk to me going, are you serious right now? Like, are we actually having this conversation? But of course, that was my inside voice, right? But of course, in that style, in that dynamic where you are dealing with a higher priced entry point, higher priced offering, of course you're going to have that kind of a person in there. But what is really great about VIP experiences, and this really, I speak about it also from a creator's point of view, is this is where you're really able to get quite personalized. And if we go back to one of the elements that makes an incredible experience, it's personalization, right? So when you are able to add elements to the experience that can make it highly personalized, like to give you a practical example, at Cirque du Soleil on any one night, the big tops sit 2,500 people, but in the VIP, the capacity was 150 people, let's say. So I actually had a lot of time with my guests, and that is the thing that I loved the most. I got to see them before the show, during the show, and after the show. So I got to kind of go on that roller coaster ride with them. At the beginning, they didn't know what to anticipate, or maybe they've seen a couple of shows, so they're ready. Intermission, they're kind of like, like it's the atmosphere was just so energetic and vibrant. And then after the show, usually they're just like, oh my gosh, I didn't want that to end. That was the best thing ever. So I got to kind of see the difference in the energy throughout at the different stages of that experience. And I think by watching that night after night after night, it really taught me a lot about every single stage of the experience is very important. And I think oftentimes we don't really think about that. If we think about experiences that we go through, oftentimes there's one element of the experience that's really great. But oh gosh, at the beginning, and then the way they spoke to me, and they lost my ticket, and then so now you're in a terrible mood. Oh, but there was this one bit that was really great. Oh, and then I had to wait 2 hours to get out of the parking. And so it's really interesting to consider the entire journey, and what VIP experiences allows me to do as the creator is to deal with a group size that's smaller so that I can add more personalization. I can be a lot more intentional with how I'm doing things. And I think when we're looking at creating, it's such an important consideration. How can I maybe reduce the group size a little bit so that I can create a little bit more impact, and so that I can touch them at every stage of the journey, not just in one main moment.
So what stood out to me and just like rang to me for what you were saying, because I absolutely love that you're spending more time, and
Yeah.
you're basically investing more time and spending more time with people. And I think leaders often can get so inundated and just busy with stuff, oh, I've got this and this and this to do. I don't have time to focus on my people.
Yeah.
And they neglect the most important thing, that they're there to do, which is create that experience and lead their people. And I absolutely love that. And that's why it's so important, leaders. I want you to remember this point that Caroline just made. Make sure you are dedicating time, and it's making time for people. It really is a matter of making it a priority to focus on your people. And like the VIP experience here, like they made it a priority to focus on this number of people. They pay a little more for their ticket or whatever, and they create an experience for them, and it better be good or they're not going to pay for it again, right?
Right. And I think the other really interesting part of my role when I was with Cirque du Soleil is, and I had 2 months with my group of people, and then we would move cities and I'd do it all again. Right. So I had 2 months to connect with my team. However, I really only had a very small amount of time to make that initial connection. For the most part, we would train our staff. We'd be given our staff. So I'd be meeting them for the first time. I would train them for about 3 hours, and then we would go and do the premiere of the show, which is the most important night. The first night is the most important night in any city. And so I had to find ways, and I only was able to do this, I think, through a lot of trial and error, but I had to find ways to connect very, very quickly. because I did not have the luxury of time. And I wanted to make that connection. I wanted to impact them straight away. I wanted them to trust me from the minute they met me. You know, I wanted to create that dynamic within the team. And I feel like sometimes as leaders, we think that this is a very long, extended process that we need to go through, onboarding 3 months, maybe there's a trial period for 6 months, and then we'll get to know them after that. And I learned that the most successful teams that I ran, the most successful operations that we had were when I could connect with my team
Mhm.
at the earliest possible moment, and where I felt that reciprocal connection back from then. That's when it was on. That's when we were so good as a team, but it took a lot of trial and error. A lot didn't work. And then of course I'm changing cultures. So sometimes it would work brilliantly in one place.
Sure.
And then I get to the next place, use the same strategy, and they're just like, what? Like, who are you? And I'm like, damn it. So it's constant trial and error. But I think that's a key point that leaders often don't consider. Immediate connection. How can you do it? And a lot of times I think it's through storytelling. It's through how can you come across in a way where maybe they see themselves in you, right? They want to be that aspiring leader. So they connect with you immediately on that element. Or maybe you have a really great story. The easiest way sometimes for me to connect with people, especially in different countries around the world, was to say I was from Australia, because then people start talking about kangaroos and they start talking about like sharks in all the beaches.
Yeah.
But that was my strategy in places where I knew that was almost like a novelty. So it's like figuring out like how can you connect immediately and then maintain that connection and kind of build that trust, but very quickly. I think it's possible to do that very quickly, but you have to like you said, put that work in, make it a priority.
Is a bloomin' onion really an Australian thing?
No, that's an American.
It's just Outback Steakhouse.
It's so funny you say that, because I was having this conversation with people recently. Like, I was mentioning that I'd gone to that restaurant and I was like, what is a blooming onion? And they're like,
Bloomin' onion.
bestseller, I'd never seen it before in my life till I was in America and I went to Outback Steakhouse.
Yeah, we Americans can figure out how to make any healthy vegetable unhealthy by deep frying it.
Deep fry.
Right. So one thing that I want to ask you, because I'm curious how it works in different cultures. You were talking about connecting with people, and one of the things that I'm really passionate about, and I learned this recently from folks like Gary Vee and Brad Lee, is they talk about, to get trust from your people. Jocko Willink, he talks about this. To get trust from your people, you need to give trust first as a leader. And it's lots of leaders think, oh, they need to earn my trust before I'm going to give it out. But it's really hard for your people to trust somebody that doesn't trust them back. And so, is that something that works in every culture? Like, do you see that being something that resonates in the different cultures, or are there certain cultures that maybe think about that differently?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, that was always my strategy. It definitely backfired. Like, there was some moments where I gave too much leniency, or I came across too relaxed, and that really slapped me in the face in terms of our operations. And I was not able to build that leader mentality, that rapport back up in the time that we were together. But one strategy that I continued to use, especially as I mentioned that I had that restraint of time, was I immediately said, guys, this is the kind of leader I am. And I would say, I from the very first moment, I give you guys a lot of leeway because I expect you guys to think outside of the box. I expect you to be creative. I expect you to come to me with ideas. And if we are able to form that kind of a bond, and if we are able to come up with new ideas together and improve our operations together, that's where our strength is going to be as a team. And I say, I don't micromanage. And I say, but the minute that you guys take advantage of that can quickly change. So because I didn't have a lot of time with these guys, I started to try that strategy and say, this is what you can expect in the next 2 months from me as your leader. And I have to say that for the most part, it really did work, because now, after me talking for 10 minutes, now they kind of get it. They get me. They know who I am. And they also know, I think, if they're going to respond to it, or if they're like,
Yeah.
that doesn't sound good at all. But at least they know, right? And at least I can get their feedback, even visually, straight away. And so, but I also think sometimes that takes a bit of courage to go, this is the kind of leader I am. And instead of waiting and, oh, I hope they like me, I hope they respond well to me, I hope they kind of do what I say in a way, by putting your heart on your sleeve, as the saying goes, you are able to, I think, build that rapport and just establish that connection quite quickly for the majority of people, and they're able to see you not just as a leader but as a person really, really, really quickly. So I started using that and it worked, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to roll with this until it doesn't work anymore. But that was the strategy that I used, and I think especially for new, like young leaders that are in their first couple of roles, I think it's a nice strategy because it's you're sharing yourself, right? It's storytelling. You're telling them about you. So generally that's a little bit easier than thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have all these leadership strategies. Oh, I don't know all the terminology. I don't know how to handle these situations. So if you lead with yourself and your own story, I think sometimes that connection can be made quite quickly and very to a really deep level.
I absolutely love that. Absolutely love that. And I pose the question to all you leaders out there in the GLE network, or maybe you're sitting thinking about leaders you've had. When was the last time that you sat down and shared with your people who you are as a leader and how you will be communicating as a leader and how you want your people to communicate with you, and really taught your people how to communicate with you and how you're going to communicate with them and set those expectations? Because I think many leaders don't take the time to do that. And something that simple can be life changing. I mean, from day one, it doesn't have to take a lot of time. Like you said, you didn't have time in Cirque du Soleil. You had 2 days or 1 day or whatever, right? It needed to work because
Yeah,
the show was going on. So,
exactly.
it had to happen. And, I just think about that. And I think that's a great takeaway for our audience and all the leaders out there. Make sure you teach your people how you want them to communicate and how you're going to communicate, and set that expectation, because so few do that. And I think it's a huge tool to be able to do that. And it does take courage. I think you
Yes.
nailed it. It does take courage to do that.
I think it takes courage, and I also think you have to live up to what you've just said, right? If you
Right.
say, you know what, I'm not a micromanager, and then a week later you micromanage the hell out of your team, then immediately the trust is gone, and there's no
Sure.
point in starting with that conversation. So as long as you're able to live up to the hype that you just created around your own leadership style, I think it's a great strategy. It's definitely worked for me in my experience.
Well, for sure. And I think you can set the expectation too, since nobody's perfect, right? We're not going to be perfect in our leadership. So you can, like, that's another expectation you can set. Like, hey, look, I'm not perfect and I might fail at this. And I just want y'all to know, none of us are perfect. And I know y'all are going to probably have failures too. And we'll work through those together. But this is where I want to go. And I think that's amazing. That's a great piece of advice we need to remember.
There's a book, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Alive at Work. It's by Daniel Cable. It's a great leadership book. I would highly recommend it. And in this book, he talks about there's a whole element of kind of culture and purpose, right? And I think oftentimes with organizations in particular, you know what the values are in the mission statement because they're all over the website and they're probably in your onboarding manual and they're up on a wall, most likely somewhere. But oftentimes it's just empty words, right? And it's usually buzzwords as well. So they lose a little bit of their impact. And what he really, there was this sentence in the book, and I was, just when you read something and you're like, damn, like, wow, that was so good. And he really was talking about that idea of purpose. And he said, you can talk about purpose. You can sit there in front of your team and talk about purpose all day long, but they actually have to, it's not just about hearing what the purpose is. They actually have to experience the purpose for themselves and really find where their uniqueness in the team actually adds to that purpose. And so even when you think of that leadership style, that conversation, having that conversation with them straight up about, this is the style of leader I am, how can you help them experience your leadership style and not just listen to you say it? And I think it's something, again, like we've mentioned, that we don't often consider, but if you stand in front of them and say, this is the kind of leader that I am, and they don't really see that in the first, like, let's say week, then your messaging is off. or
Right.
you're in denial about what kind of leader you are, maybe. But again, how do they experience it? If you say one thing and then they experience it and they're like, oh wow, yeah, okay, yeah,
Mhm.
I get it now. I see that in her leadership style. Connection or automatically made.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. We got to do what we say we're going to do, and that's such a big thing. I love that point, and it's a great one to end on. Caroline, this has been super fun chatting with you. One of my favorite conversations.
Ah, great.
Let people know where they can find you if they want to learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah, so the Experienced Creators on YouTube, it's I just am so in love with that project. It's like my baby. I love, I'm sure like you, interviewing people and diving into really how we can create more impactful experiences. And then in terms of social media, and then my website, it's just my full name that I'm sure you can check the spelling on this podcast, caroleneméli.com, and on all the other socials.
Awesome, Caroline. Make sure you go check her out. The Experienced Creators on YouTube. BetterYourLeadership.com is her program if you're interested in that. And Caroline, it's been super fun. Have a great rest of your afternoon over there in Montenegro. I'm jealous.
Thank you. This has been amazing. Thank you.
See ya.